Welcome. This is ARTIVISM, the power of art for social transformation. We have Aphrodite Désirée Navab with us today, and she will be introduced by Forough Farrokhzad. Forough is a freshman. She's a double major. She's majoring in criminal justice and history. Her life goal is to raise awareness about social issues faced by women and minorities all around the world. She wants to help create a world where everyone feels safe and is equally represented. She hopes to become a social justice lawyer someday and promote her goals. She has been interested in writing since she was 13, so she writes stories, actually books, not just short stories. She likes to write stories that address social issues that interest her, and she hopes someday to publish them. So Forough, do you want to tell us a little about yourself? And then you can introduce Aphrodite.
Hi, I'm Forough. I'm a freshman, and basically what you said. I like to write stories, to talk about issues that I find interesting. So today our guest is Ms. Aphrodite Navab. She was born in Iran and based in New York. The artist Aphrodite Désirée Navab mines her Iranian, Greek, and American heritage, calling forth its competing histories, myths, and politics, and tracing its impact on her personal identity. Navab's art has been featured in over 150 exhibitions and is included in a number of permanent collections, including the Edison Gallery of American Art, Crystal British Museum of American Art, the Low Art Museum, the Harn Museum of Fine Arts, Caesarea Contemporary Art Museum, Naples, Italy, and the Museum of Fine Arts, Arkansas State University. At present, Navab had a solo museum show, Landmines of Memory, at the Edison Gallery of American Art from January to April 2021. She had a solo exhibition, The Homeling, at Johannes Bach Gallery in New York from January to February 2018. Her work was exhibited at Crystal British Museum of American Art in the Traveling Group Museum show, Men of Steel, Women of Wonder, from February 9 to April 22, 2019. In 2009, her art was featured in the museum exhibition and catalog. Through the Lens, photography from the permanent collection at the Low Art Museum, University of Miami. The exhibition featured only 100 significant photographers from more than 1,000 photographic holdings, from Julia Margaret Cameron and Walker Evans to Cindy Sherman and Gregory Critson. Welcome, Ms. Navab.
Thank you, Forough, so much. We were talking before we started this wonderful presentation that I'm very grateful and honored to be invited to make and be involved with. And I was telling Forough that her last name is Aftab in Farsi, which means sunshine, and she is sunshine. So today is a freezing day in New York City. There's a lot of sun, however. So on the topic of sunshine, I would like to share a little bit about a former series of mine that it's an ink drawing series, and I'm often inspired by my parents' beautiful cultures. So Persian and Greek, at times they were enemies and at times they were friends. And it parallels our own lives and our own migrations as a family from Iran to Greece to the US, and navigating both ancient political tensions between the Persians and the Greeks and pretty modern day contemporary tensions between Iran and the United States. So it's something that is both ancient and ever present in my cultural landscape. But I wanted to share with you the WINDUP Dolls, and poetry, literature, cultures, history, and storytelling are quite important themes that run throughout many different series of mine. And I would say that this wonderful translation of the poet that I'm going to sort of bounce off of, I was inspired by her writing, Forough Farrokhzad, and a very good translation of this is done by an Iranian American poet. So the best translations to read of another language is someone who reads it, writes it, speaks in it, and also can create poetry as a translator, because things are lost in translation. I would share that, you know, when I first learned Farsi as my first language in Iran, and then I learned Greek in Greece, and then I learned English. English somehow smushed everything else. So in a sense, it was layers and layers. Now, of course, nothing is really ever forgotten. It's just stored. And you're waiting for opportunities in life to kind of retrieve them. And it happens. It happens with a scent. It happens with a word. It happens with even today, there are certain words that my first impulse is the Farsi word for it, because I learned it first there and in Farsi, and I'm still, English comes a few seconds later. So this happens with poetry. It happens with so many things because it's through language. And I would say that I find this translation quite closer to Farsi, how it was written by Forough Farrokhzad, but also through a poet's voice. So it is a translation and a translation, and it's through different women's voices. But at least to me, it holds more of the flavor and the sentiment, and maybe the even that sort of creative bent of the original writer. So the wind-up doll, which is Arusaki Kuki in Farsi, it is a lengthy poem, so bear with me. And I'm reading it as an Iranian Greek American woman in the year 2022. So bear with me to do it justice. And it's speaking out of the deepest form of respect for this amazing poet. Even more, oh yes, one can remain silent even more. Inside eternal hours, one can fix lifeless eyes on the smoke of a cigarette, on a cup's form, the carpet's faded flowers, or on an imaginary writing on the wall. With stiff claws, one can whisk the curtains aside, look outside, it's streaming rain, a child with a balloon bouquet cowers beneath the canopy. A rickety cart flees the deserted square in haste. One can remain fixed in one place, here, beside this curtain, but deaf and blind. With an alien voice, utterly false, one can cry out, I love. In the oppressive arms of a man, one can be a robust, beautiful female, skin like leather tablecloth. Breasts large and hard, one can stain the sinlessness of love. In the bed of a drunk, a madman, a tramp, one can cunningly belittle every perplexing puzzle. Alone, occupy oneself with crosswords, content with unimportant words. Yes, unimportant letters, no more than 5 or 6. One can spend a lifetime kneeling, head bowed before the cold altar of the imams. Find God inside an anonymous grave, faith in a few paltry coins. One can rot inside a mosque's chamber, an old woman, prayers dripping from lips. Whatever the equation, one can always be a zero, yielding nothing, whether added, subtracted, or multiplied. One can think your eyes are buttons from an old ragged shoe caught in a web of anger. One can evaporate like water from one's own gutter. With shame, one can hide a beautiful moment like a dark, comic instant photo, rammed deep into a wooden chest. Inside a day's empty frame, one can mount a portrait of a condemned, a vanquished, a crucified. Cover the gaps in the walls with silly, meaningless drawings. Like a wind-up doll, one can look out at the world through glass eyes. Spend years inside a felt box, body stuffed with straw, wrapped in layers of dainty lace, with every salacious squeeze of one's hand. For no reason one can cry. Oh, how blessed, how happy I am. So this was Cholet Volpe's translation of Forough Farrokhzad's Haruseki Kuki wind-up doll. And I have to tell you, I was in my 20s when I first read it, and I read it in translation, and then I tried to decipher it in my baby Persian over the years, to read it in Farsi and to sound it out and to hear where it repeated words and the rhythm, which was different than in English. And I would say this comes closer to the rhythm of the poetry. And I would say also the passion, the frustration. And I identified with it in such a visceral way that I had no words. So words left me with no words. And I could only imagine images and drawings, like she had mentioned in her poem. I said, I need to make ink drawings that go from the concrete to the abstract. And what is it about these wind-up dolls? I never liked them since I was little. I never liked the cooking, the winding of the dolls. So they irritated me, they bothered me. There was something robotic about them, and they tended to be girls. There were little boy ones too that I had seen, but there were so many girls. And then as I got older, my birthday's on Halloween. So when I would see these costumes, wind-up girl doll costumes, they were very sexualized and eroticized, and for little girls and teenagers and adult women. I was like, this really disturbs me. So something I want to do about the objectification of women, which isn't exclusive to Iran. So it's something that I just shared with you, how in popular culture and here in the West, I can also see these costumes and the wind-up doll girls and little kids wearing it, but it's never that neutral. There is a lot that is symbolized and hinted at or objectified. So I was like, how can I take this objectified doll, which is not innocent? How do I take that winding mechanism and have it turn into a key? So this is the thoughts that are going in my creative process, where I can turn something into a metaphor. So how can I take this winding mechanism in the back of the dolls and have it become a key that frees the doll? So it's no longer an object that is controlled by someone else or by a society or by our set of values or by patriarchy. Just substitute the controlling body with the controlled. And you get a sense of the work that I'm going to share with you today, which is my Wind-Up Dolls series. And it starts with basically the most concrete, the most representational, I would say, of a woman and her back and a winding mechanism and her head here. It's quite abstract, some of you might say, but I mean, there is a semblance of a woman and a body and a winding mechanism. And from there, we have my flight of exploration and imagination. I just continue to play with the shapes, the forms, the human, and the objectification of that anonymous person. And I continue to use my brush, my ink, water, and paper. And for me, it's very much a diary. It is me pouring my thoughts and feelings, my ideas, my hopes, my dreams, my fantasies onto paper. It's a dialogue with water, brush, paper, and my history and my stories. And it's my way of storytelling because it's quite in series form. There's a beginning, there's a middle, and there's an end. Even though I might do several series of this, since the story is not over. You'll see the work getting increasingly abstract. And why it's important for me is that this is not just Foroughu's story. It's not just Cholet Volpe who translated Foroughu's poem story. It is not just my story. It is something that I feel goes from the specific and the local to a more global discussion and participation. So what I hope with any of my works is that although it might be very personally inspired, it is not just about me. And it doesn't speak just to me or to my history. It's something that I wish would connect many, many, many more people. People who might feel their story is revealed by these stories and by these voices, and that they are inclusive, they're not exclusive, the stories, and that they are timeless and they travel and they dance through multiple languages and multiple boundaries. And the way I have presented it, one gallery in Soho, the Zurcher Gallery, I had a smaller version of these ink drawings on a much smaller scale. I had these on the wall, but I had the initial earlier drawings, which were very small, and they could fit nicely in a box, like the box she had talked about, that the doll would be stored in, like a woman who would be hidden inside the home, hidden or stored away. So in that show, I had the small drawings in a box, and the key that inspired me for the winding mechanism was the very key that would open up that box. So there are many transformations of this series, and I can envision it getting larger and larger to the point that all you're left with is this sort of metamorphosis. It's just like a metamorphosis, and the key is the last recognizable thing, the winding mechanism. So this is a process, and it's gone through many visualizations and versions, but what themes are quite important to me is the idea of metamorphosis, of something that might bind you and keep you tethered. Could be, let's say, even that mechanism can turn into something that frees you. And obviously, it's something that isn't quite literal. There is the necessity of imagination, compassion, understanding, learning, and this will to kind of free yourself from certain constraints. So for me, it's a collaborative engagement, and the work is it is beyond the two dimensions. So it obviously started with a woman's poem in Iran who died before I was born. She died at 32 years of age, very young. Forough Farrokhzad's story, there's so many interviews, documentaries, and books written about Forough and her life. And I would say, when I was born in Iran, I did not have the opportunity to read her poetry, but I did in the US because the books weren't censored. The books are still censored. Her books were banned when the government shifted from the monarchy to the Islamic Republic. But apparently today, though, you can still get the books. They just cannot have her name on the cover. So there's veiling of her name. Obviously, they're her poems or it's her picture on the cover, but you can get in Farsi translations of her books. They might not be legal, but they are there, and there are people reading them still in many, many countries, but particularly she's still being read in Iran, even though officially her work is banned. And what I wanted to share is that it's across generations that these inspirations can happen, and they're transformative, and they are pivotal moments in liberating very specific people who have been affected and moved by these different genres of expression. So one woman's poetry has inspired another woman's drawing series. And what I hope is that once the conversation and the sharing begins, it keeps traveling, and people have questions, people have their own encounters, their own relationships, and their own interactions with these texts. And for me, all of it is text that can be deconstructed. So it is also an invitation, and it's an opening for more conversations to happen and interactions. So that's why I want to stop the monologue and have a dialogue. So I welcome questions that will be moderated by hopefully.
Fiza, you can close it up just a little bit and then open the forum for questions and discussion.
Okay. Thank you so much for being our artivist today. Next Monday, April 4th, is Art for Life, the Role of Culture in Sustainable Development, through case studies with Dr. Madhura Dutta. For more information on this and all of the series past and upcoming events, please go to the website www.adelphi.edu/artivism/. You can follow us on Facebook and Instagram. Our handle is Artivism for Shared Humanity, or simply Google Artivism at Adelphi. Our YouTube channel is Artivism for Shared Humanity. We are also hosting an open call art installation for all creative thinkers. If you would like to get more involved in this ongoing initiative, please contact the Artivism team at artivism@adelphi.edu. I would now like to ask if there are any questions for our artivist. Please use the raise hand function or Zoom, unmute yourself, or ask your questions in the Zoom chat.
Okay, any questions? I know I have a lot. Aphrodite, I loved the way your drawings evolved, right? At times they looked almost warrior-like, right? So at first it looked like it was very, tight, right? And then it was freeing up, and then it took a different stance, like almost like she was holding a staff of sorts, and then free again. Was that evolution, I guess, intentional? Did you want to show all of that, or did it just happen?
I have to be honest that there are these surprises and accidents that happen in the process, because the way that my practice is working in the negative. So I start with water on blank paper, And then I take my brush and ink, and what I start creating is positive, but out of the negative, and how it bleeds, and how basically the journey and the dialogue between the ink, the brush, my mind, and the paper is somewhat controlled, but somewhat out of my control. So I have very intentional marks that I'm making, but I am wrestling with water. And so I definitely let the paper also speak, and the water. Obviously the ink marks and the brush have an intentional position. And obviously, like in the shapes here, I'm really controlling certain things, but I can't control the way that there's this beautiful sort of running and intermingling. For me, it's almost like rivers that flow, that are different tones. And I love the accidents too. I embrace the accidents and the marks that run into each other. And it's almost like a Rorschach test for the viewers, because how you feel that day, what you just saw, what you're thinking about, you might see in the drawings, and it might not have been my intention at all, but there's only so much I can control, and there's so much I wish to free. So if you see spines, and if you see eyes, and if you see organic shapes, if you even see musical notes, there are composers who've written to me who they see different symbols in music that they use for writing. And if you see shapes that remind you of other things, that is what I intend. But what exactly, it's really free for you. What I can control is how I was inspired. I can let you know who inspired me. I can control some of the conversation about the winding mechanism and the woman's figure and body, and how she might end up being transformed into this. It could be angry, it could be soulful, it could be passionate, it could be, for me, a whole world of activity and interaction and transformation. So metamorphosis and transformation are themes I'd like people to think about, but I really would love for it to continue expanding, for something that travels and something that's more than just about my work. So I love that you saw all those different things as well.
I also want to say, I mean, I don't speak or read Farsi, but I do speak and read Greek. And in a lot of, there's just some things that can't be translated, right? They just can't be. We don't have the words in English, or they don't sound as rhythmic, right? You don't have that feeling when you translate it. But what I love about your drawings is that you captured the rhythm and the flow of the poetry, which maybe can't be translated effectively from Farsi to English, or from Greek to English, but you were able to capture that rhythm, that dance, that flow, the transformation to and from in your drawing. So if that was what you wanted to do, you got it.
But I appreciate that. Working with ink and brush and paper, I enter a very old tradition. And it was a tradition that was exclusively made and done by men. So it's very empowering for me, from Persian calligraphy to Japanese calligraphy to ink drawings done by several cultures. I would say I'm entering that discussion, but I wasn't invited. I wrote myself in, and I'm not trained I'm not a calligrapher. I have the utmost respect for women and men in these traditions, but there was a time it was exclusively men, and women were not part of that tradition. So I like to use traditions, break them, and remake them, and think about ways that we can imagine involving more people. So more voices. And there is something, and in other of my series, you'll actually see Greek letters come out. You'll actually see Farsi letters. And you're like, is that really an alpha, or is that an aleph? Or do you see that looks like, like a doll in Farsi, or delta, and what you'll see is like, well, this girl, like a lot of people, she went through several translations, even in her own speaking and in her own language, and it enters the both the chaos, the confusion, and the order, and maybe even the growth and transformation, not just through language and speech, but through her own artwork. So that's something for me, it's very liberating to take something that's, okay, this is how it should be and ought to be, but this is how it can, might, and possibly it could be a new way of doing things. So one of my series that you could go and check out on my website is She Speaks Greek Farsi. So here I was, and I can bring you to see how it looks in person, actually. I don't know how good this looks with all this lighting, but maybe I take the. So if you see these words, dus and philos, and these two are pretty good for this presentation. And then you see badan and soma. This is writing in Farsi and Greek on my abdomen. So they are photographs. They are done by black and white markers of my son's Crayola water-based markers. And they're easy to erase and wipe. And you'll see, if you look closer at the images on the internet, you'll see a lot of smudge marks, erasures, moles, skin, you'll even see pores. And this series, it's something that you'll see, well, there's the literal language, there's the Farsi and the Greek written on skin, but I feel like my art is very much like that again and again. It's dealing with language, history, migration, exile, diaspora, and confusion, but then a new language, and as I was writing the Persian and the Greek for an exhibition in Greece years ago, the father of the sponsor of my series said, do you know that there's an expression in Greek that milai anglika Farsi is to speak it fluently, fluidly, elegantly. I was like, but Farsi is what Iranians call their language. That's Persian, that's Farsi. It's like saying, el nikah, but this is an adjective or an adverb or whatever, and it's so positive. It meant a lot to me. It blew me away. I didn't know this word in Greek. I know Farsi, and I knew that Farsi sounded awfully like Farsi. And he said, yeah, actually it comes from Farsi, and it has turned into something as a compliment, that you can speak like the Persians. If you speak English or French this fluidly, this elegantly, this flowingly, this poetically, you're speaking like the Persians. I was like, what? The ancient Greeks came up with something that was complementary to the ancient Persians? This doesn't make sense. So to me, it was itself a metaphor. It ended up being, she speaks Greek Farsi. So yes, I speak Greek. Yes, I speak Farsi. And yes, there's this complement in the Greek language that says a lot to me about what ancient enemy empires can come up with to present day antagonistic nations. So I felt this could be a nice hint to Iran and the United States to come up with better ways of interacting with each other, even with genuine compliments. I don't know. So the series was also started very visceral and personal and from the body and the cell, and ended up becoming flat two-dimensional things that look like graffiti or tattoos. And it could be anybody's, but it started from this place. So any more questions?
Well, I'm happy to have Fiza on, Fiza, the student ambassador, because she writes stories, and she writes stories that relate to her culture. So Fiza, you may want to connect with Aphrodite at some point. She's just a freshman, but she's busy and has set high goals for herself. Any other questions? Yes, so here, Fiza, right? Any other questions? Carolina?
Yes, I'm coming. It takes me a little time to get to the mute. Uh-huh. I was thinking of that tool and the metaphor that you mentioned of first it being a winding tool, right, for the doll, and then it became through your process a key of freeing, right? So perhaps I'm going to put it in as a comment, and I will welcome if you'd like to expand on it, and also from the audience. But sometimes perhaps we see that physically more, right? But what about mentally, right? Like from all that you have shared with us today, what I capture is that in every context that you were at, in Greece, right, in here in the U.S., in all over the world where you extract, and that has more, as you mentioned, the morphosis, right? Your mind, and that's another level of also of that freedom, or that key breaking away from perhaps traditions that need a new version of it, as you also mentioned. So any more suggestions or comments that you might like to put along these lines, that for our audience, it's not just the physical but also the mental, because that main component of changing the way of thinking is what will be that key that will set you free. You can follow the media, you can go and just do right what you see in new context, but if you don't internalize and make it your own, and from yourself going out mentally being aware of what's happening, you'll still be that wind-up doll.
I completely agree, and would love more people discussing or asking questions about that. But very important, the mind, the body, and the spirit are interconnected. And I think that, you cannot have one trapped. The other one is basically disembodied or disconnected. And I feel that there are many ways that we can expand the mind, enlighten the mind, and through many, many media, many forms. And the most important is, I think you have to have a few things. I remember for my doctoral studies at Columbia, I wrote a dissertation on the art of women in exile, Iranian women, and how they use their art to have a dialogue with their native country and their adoptive country, Iran or France, Iran and the United States. And it seems very important to have a symbolic medium, literature, language, writing, art, visual arts, whatever art form, but there is a symbolic medium through which you express and explore very complex things. It also connects you to other people's explorations through a symbolic medium. But you also need, you need this symbolic medium in which to explore, express, understand, make sense. But you need to narrate it to an audience, a witness, whether it's traumatic memory, whether it is not traumatic, whether it's enlightening, empowering, moving, or basically a significant moment in your life, you need a method in which to narrate it, so the symbolic medium, and then you need someone or a group of people to narrate it to. They're the ones who will be the listeners, the viewers, the visitors, and they basically, as you give voice, they bear witness. And this is the art of storytelling, but it's also the healing aspect of storytelling and how these stories can travel. So you need a medium in which to tell the tale or tell your story. And you do need it to travel. You do need people to hear it, to explore it, to ask questions of it, but also to validate and listen and bear witness to your story. It is healing not just for the narrator, but for those who are part of the exchange or the process. So there is something about discourse, language, and those who lend an ear or a heart or a mind. And I think it is always interactional and transformative for multiple people that are actively involved. So there is agency, but it's not just for the narrator, the storyteller, or the artist, or the poet. It's multi-directional, and this is something that expands minds and hearts and the imagination. But there's definitely a few things that are part of that component. Telling a story in a closed room with no one there is a very lonely experience. And it is like a diary, which is where my work starts as. I can make hundreds of these, but do I want them to stop with me? Or do I want them to start speaking to other people and beginning conversations and maybe opening up serious discussions, or moving or powerful, or even just slightly getting people to think a little bit more about ways, yes, that we objectify. It could be women, as in this series, and girls who wear the costumes for fun. But why not ask these questions? How are we involved in the objectification of women's bodies? And for me, this is not like didactic, or I'm doing propaganda, or I want to get a whole group of people to protest, but it is my form of saying, hey, I feel the way that you might want to control another, I don't agree with it. All forms of subjugation, control, confinement, winding, and telling them how small their world is, how small it is they can move. What is it? What's written out for them since birth? Yes, I challenge that. I challenge that in many ways through my writing and my art. Let's imagine a different way of being, and a different way of journeying and growing and accepting difference and others. So I feel like if my winding mechanism turns into a doll that then becomes a symphony, for me, this is like a symphony. And I start seeing treble clefs, I start seeing musical notes too. And I start imagining ways in which this winding mechanism becomes a key and starts floating and flying. Like in my Super East West Woman series, you can see that online and at Crystal Bridges Museum, where my grandmother's chador, which is the Farsi word for veil in Iran, turns into, and she was a very strong, beautiful influence in my life. So my Haj Khanum, her chador can turn into a cape, and that cape allows Super East West Woman to fly. So no, she's not stuck, and she's not trapped, and she's not powerless. She actually has agency. So it is my imagination, but it's also my invitation.
I love that imagination and invitation. That's nice.
Ms. Navab, thank you very much for your heartfelt presentation.
Right.
Every word, I can feel it coming from your heart. So I thank you for that, because that's what touches, and that's what, leads to action, right? Like in this case from us, those words are going to be reverberating in our mind, in our heart, and see what we can do from what you mentioned, to see how we can be also that change, right? To be more mindful about our everyday steps, and taking into consideration. I loved all the languages. I mean, like Farsi, Greek, English, right? Then also like our student ambassador, she's also into storytelling. So it's just overall a thought-provoking conversation. We usually also close up with
Carolina, before you close, we have a question from Mariana.
Oh, sure, yes.
Thank you. I just wanted to thank you for your work. And one thing that I'm seeing that I think is particularly moving and beautiful in the work, which is the relationship between what has been described as more of the mind, the intellectual, the symbolic aspect of the work, vis-a-vis the medium that you use, and how water itself allows some surprises. And what I found absolutely beautiful is this double movement in the work, in which the winding, the key itself, right, is the closure of a human being, of a woman, of the possibilities of a woman. But then as you connect it to water, right, the possibilities emerge. And so what I thought was really interesting is how the very medium itself is what opens up the possibilities. When we think about politics and art, right, we're thinking about how we put ourselves maybe in a protest, and we use some kind of performance art in order to maybe disrupt spaces. In Latin America, you know how people have gone to places where there have been killings, and they have done a performance. They have basically trying to change the context of the materiality. But in your work, there's this quiet resistance, but it's not so quiet, right? Because it's a way of expressing resistance via water and ink and paper. And we can say that, I guess that what I wanted to say is that this is an opening, however small, right? Not only for us as the witness of the opening, but for you to do it. That itself is a political moment. I mean, the way you put it, it's lonely, right? If you were to do it just in your room, but suppose that you didn't have the possibility of sharing it, carrying it through. Even then, to me, it's such a resistant moment, as a way of you as a woman making something that describes you otherwise than the doll that you're supposed to be. And so I just wanted to point that out, and how beautiful that is.
I appreciate that so much. And I work very solitary. So, and Forough Farrokhzad, and people I love, they work in solitude. And even though some of my large prints are performative, I always do them alone and unannounced and privately. So if you look at this work here.
Yes, which I love too, yes.
And you'll see it at a show coming up at AIR, Artists in Residence Gallery, where I'll perform, but it's an audience of me, myself, and I, and paper and water and ink. But I'm having a dialogue, a challenge, a contradiction, a protest, but also love and immersion with an old Persian tradition of making woodblock prints. But I use my body as the printing mechanism. So I become that woodblock and I turn on paper like in one of these series that you see on the wall. And in that sense, I still work from the solitary and the personal and the body. And I tackle things that are part of maybe the politics and issues going between the different parts of my identity, Iran or Greece or the US. But I then end up, I am a very shy performance artist who's terrified of the stage. As Argy and Carolina know, I'm terrified of public presentation and terrified of public performance. So I am very solitary in the work that I do, but I am wrestling with things that are out there and in the past. And I'm having conversations with my favorite writers who have passed, and I want to bring them to life as well. It's very important for me at first, but then I do want to share. I have that urge that I did this here in the privacy of my home, and I want to share it with strangers. And so this is the dialectic, and it's the tension and also the urge that I have, but also the nervousness, the discomfort, all of that is in the art. And then this private work gets publicly shown, but you never see my face. And for me, they're more like the prints, the visas on the passports that I have. I feel like they're more like these marks that are stamps of me, but they're not a day in the life of me and my kids. So it's not it's not a basic identity picture, right? To sort of scan me and put me away and categorize me or put me in a passport. They're more like the smudge marks, for me, they're like, someone had written that about me and I was like, it's true. Some of my work looks like the visas and the stamps and the smudge marks on my passports. It's so true. It's so true, because I don't want to be that mugshot. I don't. I really want something to be more like the smudge marks and the transitions, translations, and the ineffables that you can't find the right word. But maybe it's an opening. I really do hope that it opens up possible interactions with others who also feel tongue-tied, who also sometimes have to explain or be an ambassador about the horrible things your present day nation, that your adoptive country or your native country, that they take turns in doing pretty bad stuff internationally. So, and then you're asked to explain. So for me, I don't use books to do that. I don't write, essays or articles in newspapers, but I do make my art to somehow navigate that sometimes I don't want to explain one culture to another, or this stigma to another, or this stereotype to, I want to explore it in my art. But what you might see is a protest or a challenge, but don't ask me to be ambassador.
Thank you.
Thank you. Professor Argy, you want to share for all of our audience, just in case, the open call that closes tonight, the social media, just a refresher?
Yes, of course. You can follow us on Instagram at ARTIVISM, the number 4 for Shared Humanity. I'll put it in the chat. Our Facebook page is the same. We have the YouTube channel, which has all the prior recordings, I think all but 2. This is number 41 now, I believe. We are in our 3rd season. We are booked for the spring. We have some dates available for the fall. We have artivists and artists from all over the world. Next week, they'll be zooming in from India. The week following from the UK. The week after that, I believe, is Greece. And of course, the US. And we also have an open call, Arts for a Purpose. Aphrodite has submitted one of her works. We're very happy to say there are 5 venues. It is the Offutt Gallery at Teachers College at Columbia University, Adelphi University, their PAC Gallery, the Consulate of Costa Rica in New York. We have an online gallery that comes out of the EU, art-profiles.net, and the Center for Women of New York. You do have time if you want to submit. If you're not sure what you want to submit, you can just drop us an email at artivism@adelphi.edu with just a note, save me a spot, so we know to look at it, in the next couple of days. Let's see, thank you to... Yes, and student ambassadors. We have a student ambassador program, just like FISA here. Students that come on, speak about their own initiative, introduce the presenter for the day. What we want is for these young people to get into the, habit of speaking their voice, really speaking for themselves, promoting themselves, meeting other people, building networks, becoming a part of a community, and encourage them to take initiative, to be a part of change. Yes, so if anybody here listening would like to present, you can contact us. If you have student ambassadors of any age that would like to serve, you can contact us as well. Carolina, do you want me to show a little bit of that video?
Yes, but before we do that, let's hear it, and let's hear a shout out for Ms. Fisa here as the student ambassador. And
yes,
of course,
Fisa.
To our presenter, Ms. Navab. But before we go there, Ms. Navab, we always ask, what will be one key takeaway from your presentation today as a takeaway for action for our audience?
Well, since we talked about taking something that bothers you, and for example, for me, it was the winding mechanism and objectifying that thing which it wound. Imagine ways that you can have it transform. So metamorphosis, transformation, invention, reinvention, these things are takeaways of my work, but also as a strategy to imagine a different kind of future. So that mechanism is a key that opens and unlocks anything that might trap anyone.
Yes, perfect, beautiful. I love that takeaway. Again, we would like to say thank you to our audience members for being here tonight with us from wherever you might be zooming in around the world now. Like Ms. Navab mentioned, it's a chilly afternoon here in New York, but perhaps where you're coming in from is a sunny 90-degree weather over there. So yesterday it was a Global Theater Day, and we have a little video that Professor RG is going to introduce to us. Just a couple of seconds of your time here to congratulate all the theater communities around the world.
Okay, thank you also, Sing for Hope, which is our sponsor, Adelphi University, Teachers College, Gottesman Libraries at Columbia University, to the web team at Adelphi that makes sure to post everything on time. So yesterday was World Theater Day. It was the 60th anniversary. It was established in Europe, but it's worldwide. In 1961, it began in 1962. So our colleagues in Greece sent a message over to this part of the world in celebration of World Theater Day. And I just want to share with you a short message. Hold on, I don't know, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay.
World Theater Day is celebrated every year on March 27, designated by the International Theatre Institute in 1961. This day celebrates the essence of beauty and the importance of theatre arts. Theatre is a blessing, and may the light of the theatre follow us and always enlighten us. theater's wealth is unlimited, and its culture is unique. It has the privilege of uniting the spectator with the actor, and at this moment of interaction, we cannot describe it in words, but only with emotions. So we all hope and pray for better days to come in the culture of theater, and peace all around us. Thank you very much.
To trust the dream more than fantasy. The dream hides the truth. Imagination, imitation. Everything you discover now has always existed before. This is an excerpt from the letter to an actor of the great Greek actor Yorgos Michalakopoulos.
Theater is a beacon of light, and for that reason we must keep that candle burning and shine its light to our souls.
Hello everyone, I have a small message for World Theatre Day. Theatre is very important for our lives because books are self-confidence. It helps us to find the secrets of ourselves. Theatre is the oxygen of our soul.
Hello from Greece. I'm Sofia. This is my message for the International Theatre Day. The magic of life is living. Acting is magical. Love theatre and act in every moment of your life.
What is acting? Acting is something magic, inspiration, study, and lifestyle. Dedicated to the International Theatre Day.
Hello. Theater derives from life itself. It is life. We only realized it's a necessity when shows went down due to COVID. Let's keep it in our heart as a valued breath.
I have a message for the International Theatre Day. Art connects people, and theatre is very, very important.
Okay, so that was a message from Greece. If you Google World Theater, International Theater Day, you'll find many messages like this from theater groups from all over the world. Okay, so thank you everyone for being here. Hope to see you back at one of our other presentations. Thank you. Thank you, Aphrodite.
Thank you so much.
Have a wonderful afternoon, everyone. Take care. Good day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Ms. Navab. Such a pleasure to have you. Thank you again.
Was really an honor. Thank you.
Also. Thank you. Excellent.
Yes.